Hello and welcome to this Olympic edition of The Breakaway. My name is Ben Holden, and today we are talking Team Russia for the 2022 Olympics in Beijing, China. On Sunday, January the 23rd, the Russian Hockey Federation announced its selections for the upcoming games. 31 players were selected for the Russian Olympic Committee team. All 31 players come from the KHL, and they will enter the tournament as the favorites by most to win gold for the second straight Olympic Games. They brought it home in 2018 in Pyeongchang. Joining us now to talk about this team and break it down is our portable TV KHL insider and Olympic insider, Gillian Kemmerer. Gillian, great to see you. How's St. Petersburg?
St. Petersburg has been snowing every day since I got here, Ben, but I'm so glad to be seeing you, and I wish I was in the studio next to you.
Yeah, we do too. It's great to have you with us, and we're excited to go through this Russian team. We're also going to talk about the Finns, the Swedes as we move along, and you and I will be doing a lot of different stuff as we go through the Olympics. Let's start there. I'm going to get to the team in a minute, but I know your love for Russian hockey. We all do, but I also have learned in getting to know you as we've become friends and have a working relationship, your love for Olympic hockey. Where does that start? Where does that come from for you going back to when you were a kid, I presume?
Absolutely. So while I think a lot of people have an Olympic dream of playing in the Olympics, mine was always to report from them. So holding up the hairbrush as if it were a microphone and dreaming of being at the games. So for me, everything about the Olympics, from the aesthetic to the history to the political overlay to all of the intrigue that always surrounds them, it's so exciting. And I don't think there's anything more iconic in Olympic history than the run that the Soviets had in ice hockey. They emerged on the scene at Cortina d'Ampezzo. They won their first ever Olympic Games, an absolute upset of Canada when they emerged on the world stage. We're actually now sitting at the 50th anniversary of Anatoly Tarasov and Arkady Chernyshov's last Olympic Games at the helm of the Soviet national team. That was in Sapporo, Japan. So when we look at this breadth of history in the 75th anniversary of the founding of Russian hockey, so much has been achieved and accomplished, and modern Russia as an entity actually has never won gold, you can say, because they haven't been able to win under their own flag and anthem. They won as the Olympic athletes from Russia in 2018, and now they're going for a repeat as the Russian Olympic Committee. But back in 1992, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they won as the unified team, quote unquote, because the Olympics allowed them to compete as the Soviet teams that trained together. But in reality, this was a group of athletes that now hailed from a number of different countries, whereas just a few weeks prior, they were all together in the Soviet Union. So Russia has a lot of interesting backstory when it comes to their competition on the world stage. And I'm just super excited to see this team because it is stacked.
It is stacked, and we're going to go through it position by position as we go along. But let's get your initial reaction. You and I were talking over text over the weekend. The team came out on Sunday. Your initial reaction?
Initial reaction is this team has firepower up front for miles, and it also has a very special advantage over a lot of the other teams in that the entirety of this squad is composed of KHL players. I know you spoke with Quinny as part of this series. The U.S. has a very interesting situation ahead of it. It's going to be melding players from different backgrounds, the KHL, the NCAA, the AHL. All of the teams, essentially, except for Russia, face this challenge, dealing with leagues and backgrounds of varying compete levels. Russia has an entire squad composed of KHL players, and a huge number of them come from CSKA Moscow. There's this latent chemistry. A lot of these guys have played together. In fact, 7 of them repeat from 2018. And when you have such a limited window to put together a national team, I think that's certainly an advantage for Russia going into this tournament.
Yeah, the familiarity and the chemistry, we always talk about that. You and I have talked about that. I talk about that doing games. It's not so much that coaches are looking for 3 guys on a line. They might be looking for pairs. And as we go through the roster, we'll see just that. Guys from SKA, guys from CSKA, they have that chemistry and that familiarity. And in fact, you mentioned David Quinny. He said about Russia, he said, yeah, they're the pro team. I think the majority of people that are covering the Olympics and following it are going to be right where you and I are. And this team going in is the favorite. Who on the team are you surprised, or who are you surprised about that's not on this team? Any surprises there for you?
Quite a few, actually.
Okay.
And in fact, this roster ahead of its actual publication was heavily discussed in Russia. I mean, national team play is a big deal here. And when the long list came out, there was a lot of flack given by the media, by fans about some of the notable exceptions, even from the long list. Two of them that immediately come to mind: Sergey Tolchinsky, reigning Gagarin Cup champion and playoff MVP, absolutely pivotal for Bob Hartley and Avangard Omsk, left off of the long list, as well as Damir Jafirov. And for me, this was a real travesty because when I look at his performance, he's been consistently one of the top point producers in the KHL, but not for a powerhouse, not for, say, a SKA, not for SKA. He hasn't been flanked with the flashiest line mates. Instead, he has been coaxed out an incredible individual performance. You have to give a lot of credit to Dave Nemirovsky for that. He had belief in Damir from before when he was the sporting director at Admiral and Damir was there with him. But this kid has come into his own. He has produced no matter what circumstance he's been in. He was a dark horse candidate for MVP last season. Personally, I thought he should have won it in the sense that he produced such a performance on a mid-level team. To see him left off was disappointing. Two players that I'm also a little confused by the decision-making process would come down to Anton Bordasov and Andrei Kuzmenka. Anton Bordasov is second in goals among Russian players behind Vadim Shapachyov. He's a seasoned veteran, has been extremely productive this season for SKA. He was left off after that first cut, so he was on the long list, didn't make the short list. Andrei Kuzmenka is second in overall points and getting a ton of NHL buzz. I thought for sure he was a shoo-in for this team. He's going as a reserve.
Yeah, Tolchinsky, I agree with you on that one. But it's hard. I mean, when you stop and look at it, it is tough. I mean, guys got to go, but I can't disagree with you on any of the three guys you mentioned. Those are guys that I thought, as we cover this league day in, day out, would be on this team. Let's talk about the coaching situation. Alexei Zhamnov going in. He's the head coach. He tests positive for COVID. He wasn't able to be a part of the training camp. What's the latest on that front? What can you tell us about what's going on with the coaching situation for Team Russia?
We still, of course, very much expect that Alexei Zhamnov will be leading this team going into the Olympic Games, and he has great support in someone like Sergey Fedorov, who's probably the highest profile member of that coaching staff, despite the fact that he's the assistant coach. He's right now, of course, at the helm of CSKA Moscow in the midst of his head coaching debut. That team has seen a bit of a reversal of fortune. They struggled early on in the season, but have slowly crept back up the ranks of the very competitive Western Conference. You know, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this team is coached. Now that we see such a significant influence from CSKA, both in terms of leadership and in terms of the number of players represented on this team, I see guys like, okay, Anton Bordasov, Andrei Kuzmenka, maybe there's a perception that they're not going to play the rather systematic, very defensive style that long categorized CSKA in the KHL. And when they had success under Igor Nikitin, including a Gagarin Cup championship in 2019, they played this heavily systems-dependent style of hockey. I think we may see this again. We may see some crossovers from CSKA, how they're traditionally coached and managed in recent years. And I think that that's going to be rather interesting to see how it may have filtered into the actual roster decisions. We won't know until they take the ice. We only got a slight taste of it at the Channel One Cup when Russia played as part of the Euro Hockey Tour under Zhamnov and Fedorov. But I'm going to be really intrigued to see the style that this team comes out with. I'm expecting it to be very heavily focused on systems.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Let's talk a little bit about the players. Still some uncertainty on exactly when they will go and make their way to China, but you've got the gist of what they're doing now. Where are the players at, and what are they up to these days as they get ready to head to China?
Well, I would imagine that these days have been quite long and arduous for these guys. They had to go through their routine quarantine and testing. They are currently training at the Athlete Training Center in Novogorsk. This is an incredible complex that houses all of Russia's sports teams. It's just like an unbelievable athlete city. This is where they've been focused, just outside of Moscow. It's where they made that initial cut for the roster. And as they prepare to leave, and interestingly, we saw this team actually move its preparations to the Far East ahead of South Korea because Russia had the advantage of playing on the local time zone for the Olympics, but still within their national confines. But right now, they are outside of Moscow. They're preparing, and this team centralized earlier than most. I mean, we're still waiting to see some of these teams centralize. And although the IIHF may have accidentally leaked Canada's roster, I believe we're still waiting on the final announcement today. So when you look at that context, I mean, Russia's been preparing, kind of cutting back, putting together this roster with Ilya Kovalchuk's input. He's been very important part of this management team as we go into the Olympics. So, you know, he says we may not even have the sort of final composition until February 7th or 8th. The men's hockey tournament starts later. The women's hockey tournament starts earlier in the Olympic window. But I would say we're probably going to see some iteration very close to what we've got now. But with the COVID picture, I actually think it makes the reserves so much more important, because if a player tests positive for COVID, they have to go into a very serious and lengthy quarantine in China.
Yeah, it's going to be intense. I mean, you mentioned it. I've talked to guys on the U.S. team. We're going to talk to other guys on the other national teams as well. And you're right. That's a great point about those reserve guys, those 6 or 7 guys that Russia has, that other teams are going to have. Those guys could be big. And speaking of which, just to follow up on your point about maybe the travel standpoint, first game for Russia, February 9th against Switzerland. They'll open up. They'll also take on the Czechs and Denmark in group play. All right, Gillian, let's put on the analyst hat. Let's go through this team. The old hockey adage, it starts from the net out. You and I both know, we've been around the game a long time. It does. The goaltending situation, 3 guys on the roster, but I think we're probably on the same page. It's going to come down to 2 guys, Timur Belailov of Akbars and Ivan Fedotov of CSK. Do you feel the same way?
I do feel the same way. I mean, we're looking at 3 very solid goaltenders. I think there are some other teams with perhaps more impressive stats, and Lars Johansson, who's the top goaltender in the KHL by every measure, is not obviously on Team Russia. So scoring on him is going to be quite tough, although Russia's got quite the firepower up front to do it. That's true. But Timur Belyalov and Ivan Fedotov have been really backstopping both of these teams, Akbars Kazan and CSKA. Both of these teams as well, I would argue, have been playing better in recent memory than what their standings might belie. When we saw Kazan face off against SKA, they defeated SKA, who are currently at the top of the Western Conference. You know, we've got a number of goaltenders on this list who have put on some pretty convincing performances. Alexander Simonov of SKA, because he's behind Lars Johansson, who has been just absolutely unstoppable all season, he hasn't gotten as many looks, although he has been pretty good in his few appearances for SKA. But overall, I think it's going to come down to those 2. And given that Ivan Fedotov backstops for Sergey Fedorov, we may see him get a few more nods or the start. But I think Timur and Ivan are going to be the 2 that are likely to be in net for Russia for the majority of the tournament.
All right, let's move our way up. Let's talk defense. You know how I feel about Nikita Nestroff. I absolutely love this guy. He is a world-class player. He's got one of the best first passes I've seen in the game at any level. Unbelievable. Is he the catalyst back there, or is it somebody else amongst the group they have? And we're going to go through some, but let's start with Nikita Nestroff.
Well, when we talk about the repeat performers of Pyeongchang in 2018, I think Nikita Nestroff immediately comes to mind. He is a very important blue liner for Russia. He can play both sides of the defensive depth chart. He has great versatility. You said he can accomplish a tape-to-tape pass like any of the best defenders in the business. I think he's going to be absolutely fundamental. I also have to point to Slava Voinov of Dynamo Moscow. He's been extremely strong ever since returning to the KHL, and I think that he is also going to be important, along with Yegor Yakovlev, who has been extremely fundamental to Ilya Vorobyov's Metalurg Magnitogorsk and the run that they have gone on. So those are the 3 that I might pay attention to most. But I also want to talk about Alexander Nikishin. You know, he's not necessarily the highest profile name on this roster, but he's one of the youngsters that's been given an opportunity. And he's from Spartak, which is also the organization that Alexei Zhamnov has been so closely associated with. So I think that Alexander got a very special nod and opportunity. And I'm also eager to see how he performs on the international stage.
Yeah, I really like his game. He's, 20, 21 years old. Strong, sturdy, good puck mover, good skater, does it all well. And you mentioned Yakovlev. He's the vet. He's the 31-year-old guy. He's the veteran of that D-corps, so a strong D-corps. Up front, Sergey Andronov, veteran guy, he's in his mid-30s. Is he the captain of this team, in your mind?
I think he's sort of the heir apparent in the sense that he captained CSKA Moscow. He's now the player that's actually appeared for CSKA the most in the history of the team. He was awarded that by Boris Mikhailov, who is also a very prominent captain of CSKA Moscow. So that just goes to show you, in the context of Russian hockey history, how major Andronov's accomplishment for Red Army is, and how long-standing he's been a leader at the helm, especially in light of how many CSKA players have been on this team or have been named to this team with Sergey Fedorov on the bench. I think he's a natural fit, a natural choice. And I mean, what a reliable player. He might be a veteran, but he doesn't play like one. The guy has a motor. He's extremely powerful. And I think he's going to be a very important part of any kind of run that Team Russia makes at gold.
Yeah, familiar names for those here in North America or maybe in other parts of the world. Artem Anisomov is on this hockey team. You've also got Mikhail Grigorenko as well. Those guys, very familiar names. Let's talk about Anisomov. How do you see him fitting in on this team?
It's nice to see representation from Lokomotiv Yaroslavl. Once again, this is a team that I think doesn't often get as much credit as it deserves because perhaps they're not rising up in the standings, but he's being coached by Igor Nikitin. Igor Nikitin is the one who really installed and perfected the systems at CSKA. He was fundamental to how CSKA played in light of CSKA's influence on this national team. I think Anisimov is going to fit right into this roster easily. I was happy to see him on here. I think he's a good fit and he's a strong talent, and he has really performed this season.
Moving on to Grigorenko, we both love his release. We love his shot. He's an unbelievable talent. He's going to be a big part of this team. I see him as a top-line guy. Where do you see him fitting in on this team?
I could not agree more. Mikhail Grigorenko was yet another very important factor in Russia's win in 2018. I think that he, given the number of CSKA players, again, that are on this roster, is going to slot in very easily. You know, I always make this comparison. I don't know if it's fair, but when I look back to the World Cup of Soccer in South Africa when Spain won, with all of those players from FC Barcelona and to some extent Real Madrid, they had just this latent chemistry going in, this kind of sixth sense for where one another were on the field, on the pitch. I see this as well for the CSKA players on this team, just having that latent chemistry. A lot of these guys have not just played together on CSKA, but also on the national team, even when it's, you know, players coming in, slotting in from different clubs. Mikhail Grigorenko was extremely important to Russia's performance at Worlds. Unfortunately for the team, it didn't go as expected or hoped, but Mikhail Grigorenko was very strong. He's always consistently strong within how this national team is coached, and of course, within anything regarding CSKA.
Yeah, you mentioned those other two guys, Plotnikov, Slepyshev. You've also got Pavel Karnanov on that team as well to go with that CSKA feel. In terms of one of your guys, you work with SKA, of course, Nikita Gusev, all kidding aside, a dynamic guy. He's going to be an unbelievable part of this team. Where do you see him fitting in, and what do you think they do? Do they have him with Marchenko? They've got that familiarity of being together. Your thoughts on Gusev?
Well, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of Gusev shooting the arrows off like he does when he wins or when he scores. Gusev scored 4 points in the gold medal final alone in 2018. If it weren't for Nikita Gusev, Russia would not be Olympic champions. He also scored the equalizer late in the game to bring Russia to overtime to eventually win it. So Gusev knows what it takes to perform on the Olympic stage. He's got that gold medal behind him. You know, he also has played with a number of these returners, again, 7 returners from that 2018 squad, and he's just been prolific for SKA. He is an unbelievable producer. He does have Kirill Marchenko there with him. They don't consistently play together. Kirill Marchenko tends to play lower down in the lineup, but they do have, you know, a lot of similarities in common. They obviously have shared a lot of ice time, so if they do get paired together, I think that would be a smart way of sort of taking advantage of some of the cutouts that they have from various KHL teams. But, you know, Kirill Marchenko, if we could talk about him for a second, he got a lot of trust from Alexei Zhamnov on the Euro Hockey Tour. Zhamnov played him a lot in that Channel 1 Cup, and Marchenko really responded to that elevated level of responsibility and playing minutes. I remember thinking to myself, particularly at that opening game, Russia versus Canada, Marchenko was at both ends of the ice. You couldn't take your eyes off of him. And I thought, Zhamnov's giving him a lot of attention. I wonder if he's going to be shortlisted for the Olympic team. And when you look at the fact that, for example, Anton Bordasov and Andrei Kuzmenka didn't make that final roster, but he did, it's a real vote of confidence for that youngster.
I mean, no disrespect by this. We haven't gotten to him yet. It's nothing personal, Vadim, but Vadim Shipachyov leads the KHL in scoring. Just so much to talk about. But another guy, all kidding aside, another guy, international experience, big-time performer, clutch guy. If you're whoever ends up coaching this team, Gillian, to be able to sit there and move these pieces around. Let's see, maybe I'll put Gusev with Grigorenko and Shipachyov. I mean, an unbelievable guy. I know you know him well. You've talked to him over the years. A big deal for him is not that he's in the end of his career, but he's getting near the end of his career, it would appear. Maybe I'm wrong in that. But how do you see his fit on this Russian team?
I mean, it's very hard to talk about Shipachyov and redemption in the same sentence, given that he looks like he's going to lead the KHL in points. But on some level, this Olympics is a redemption for him. He was scratched after the group opening match loss to Slovakia in 2018. So this is a guy who wants to come out and show off what these several years of KHL dominance have done for him. He's often and consistently referred to among his line mates as sort of the nucleus or the brain of the operation. He has been the cornerstone of Dynamo Moscow top line. And I think, to your point, Ben, about slotting in players, no matter who Shipachyov has played alongside, and there have been a number of players slotted in and out of that top lineup, they continue to be one of the best lines in the KHL, and he continues to be one of the best scorers. I think it's just proof that he can produce with anyone.
Have to ask you about one more guy up front. I love him. I love this guy as a player, young stud in this league. If you haven't heard the name Arseny Gritsuk, get used to it. Because whether this guy stays in the KHL or comes over here to the States and plays in the National Hockey League, unbelievable talent. I see the happiness coming from you when I talk about him. Another guy where you can just put him, okay, let's move him here, let's move him here. But he has made a massive splash this year in the league.
Arseny Gritsuk really got an opportunity under Bob Hartley. So he's a youngster that was elevated last season, winds up becoming an important piece of the Gagarin Cup winning puzzle. Hartley used to spend upwards of 1 to 2 hours, and perhaps he still does, with Gritsuk and Yegor Chinakov, who was Rookie of the Year, breaking down their game after each match in the KHL, investing in their development and talent. And that investment has really started to reap dividends. He's been unbelievable this season. He's slotting into the lineup as a regular, not as the youngster that we're giving playing minutes to out of charity or development. Not at all. I think he's a really exciting player. And I think that when we think about Russia's performance in 2018, it was sort of the coming out party for Kirill Kaprizov. I think Arseny Gritsuk is likely to be that guy at this tournament, but he's going to have to take it from Kirill Marchenko, who's also raring to go.
He is. I mean, he is dynamic. I say this about a lot of players, calling games. He's one of those guys, you're always on your toes. And because the excitement can go from nothing to everything in an instant. And, just to follow up on Gritsuk and his development, you know Hartley better than I do. I've gotten to know Bob in this league, but he is a master, it seems, at coaching these guys up. What's in the water for him? What is it? What seems to work so well for him? Is it just the players are completely bought in, or is there more to him developing some of these younger guys like Gritsuk?
With Bob Hartley, the devil is in the details. He's an incredibly hard coach, some say, to play for because he is super demanding. Details are everything. He encourages a lot of offensive creation and creativity, but you can't be irresponsible either. So Bob Hartley is the kind of guy that if you have him at your helm, you might curse him after practice because you're working so hard. But when you think about toward the end of your time in the KHL, if you're moving to the NHL, look at Ilya Kovalchuk now on the management side of this team, but was under Hartley as a youngster at the Atlanta Thrashers, rest in peace. And so now when you think about it, he has this track record of developing really strong young Russian superstars that can produce. And Gritsuk is one of them. Yegor Chinakov just came out of that program. I think if you're a young player, you're just so lucky to have the dedication that Hartley puts into the game. He's a tough coach. He's demanding, but your details will be on point. He won't allow you to play otherwise.
It's always about the little things, right? The big picture, that part's easy. You take care of the details like you're talking about, like Bob Hartley has done wherever he's been. He's won everywhere he's coached in his career, and it's always about the little things. Last thought from you. If you could project the top three going into this tournament, what's your top three for the Olympics coming up in February?
I would put Russia number one. I would put Finland number two, but a very close number two. And every once in a while, they creep up for me because I think they're a very well-organized, well-coached team. Number three is a little bit more of an open slate for me. It's kind of hard to say. I'm looking forward to seeing the confirmed Canada roster, but I don't know. I have a hope for Quinny as an American that maybe he can coach a miracle-esque performance.
2.0.
But he's got a lot.
Yeah.
2.0, but he's got a lot he's got to contend with. But for me, the definites for 1 and 2 are Russia and Finland, but 3 I'm leaving open just in case there's a sleeper.
I mean, I put you on the spot, so I'll give you mine. I'm going Russia 1, I think Sweden 2, and I think Finland 3. And I think Sweden 2.
Ooh, you're putting Finland at 3?
I am, and I think Sweden at 2, and we're going to get into them in another segment along with Finland. I think the goaltending, you talked about him earlier. We both see him a ton. Lars Johansson, Magnus Hellberg, Adam Riedeborn. To me, they have the best goaltending in this tournament going in. I would say this, and give me your thoughts on this. If there is a question mark about the Russian team, I think it's in the net. The rest of this team, I think it's going to be lights out, and they're going to be tough to stop. Where do you stand on that? You feel the same way?
I could not agree more. I think goaltending is a huge question mark. I have some questions about the blue line, about what the pairings are going to shake out. I mean, up front, there's just no question that Russia is predominant, but net minding is my biggest question mark too. And for Sweden, I mean, just set it and forget it, right? You've got the best goaltender by every possible measure from the KHL and Lars Johansson, and Magnus Hellberg. Hey, he's played in China before as well. He was under a flurry of pressure backstopping Kunlun Red Star. He was so magnificent there that he was picked up by SKA St. Petersburg. Now he's at Sochi. I know you like those guys. They're a team that I think has really come together. And without the flashiest talent in the league, except perhaps in net, they've really come together and started to play a strong game backed by youngsters. Hellberg's been a big part of why they've been able to stay in the game more often than not. Yeah,
you always hear coaches, you always hear players talk about 2 words, calming presence. That's what Hellberg is in my mind. I haven't seen him play on the international stage yet. Lars Johansson, complete calming presence. We know that. Gillian, this was fun. Great to see you again. We look forward to seeing you throughout the month of February and beyond in our coverage. Our KHL insider, Gillian Kemmerer, also our Olympic insider. Thanks so much for this. We'll see you the next time, Gillian.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Ben.